Hello and good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Mahnoor Ahmed. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really excited to be spending the next hour with you and our panelists, learning more about their respective journeys and answering some of the questions that you have sent for us. I'm going to invite our wonderful panelists to come on screen with us right now. And in chat, you'll receive a link to their full bios. In the interest of time and making sure that we really get to your questions today with our panelists, we won't be going through their full bios, but they are very, very, very impressive in their own unique and different ways. So we take a real pride and are honored that they are joining us today for this session. I do want to make sure that I'm introducing their names and where they currently are at right now. So Ifeoma Nwigwe is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Luke Rosedahl is a postdoctoral research associate at the Laboratory for Cognitive and Perceptual Learning at Brown University. And Shalima Wellington is joining us from Johns Hopkins University at the Kreiger School of Arts and Sciences, where she is a PhD student. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here and of being so giving of your time and expertise for our students today. We received a large number of questions, so we have some great questions lined up to sort through, but I'd love to get us started with asking you a question, if you could just take turns answering. We note that there's a lot of power in saying yes to different opportunities that come our way and kind of seizing the moment, but we also know that there's a lot of power in saying no. So can you share an example of something that you have said no to, either in your academic or professional journey, or your personal journey, that you feel has really shifted your trajectory in a meaningful way? And whoever would like to get us started.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ifeoma. So I recently had to say no to a colleague who they were trying to start up a nonprofit. And the idea was to help with that, with some of the research and tech support needed to get that work done. And at first I said yes reluctantly because I already had some interactions with the person, and I said I'd come back in, but after a few weeks in, I just had to say, no, this is not working. I think for me, the power of saying no is making it clear the priority of like my research at this stage of my life, and knowing that, thinking about my journey up to the postdoc has been always like a commitment to the fact that I do want to pursue academic research, and I do want my research to have an impact on society in some shape or form. And so to take away from that by doing other projects that are cool, but not on the goal, and just be able to say no and really stand firm in that no, has been very empowering. And I think leading up to that, my postdoc mentor, she always talks about the idea of you never want to spread yourself too thin because you always lose track of what's important. And so I think all of that with her guidance and talking to her about a lot of things has made that saying no so quickly, so fast, like a very, very kind of like, oh yes, this is what it is. Like, I want to do research and I need to complete these research goals. I have to complete my analyses, write papers, submit for other stuff. So that should be the priority, and just learning to prioritize yourself and your work. It's hard, but when you do it, it makes you value what you're doing for yourself even more.
I'll go. Sorry, I don't know what my internet's doing, so I hope that everyone can hear.
I think Shalima might be experiencing some technical issues. So Luke, thank you. And I'll send them a message.
My major know that transform professional.
Hey, yeah. I think it's a really important question to know when to say no. And that's something that I've said quite a bit because, like I mentioned in my bio, I've kind of switched career trajectories quite a few times. So like I started being pre-med and then switched over to going more like industry route or finally ending up in academia. And each time you shift, you're really saying no to an entire direction that your life could go. And I think it's really important to know when to do that, right? So like when I was pre-med originally, like during my time at community college and then during my early time at University of Minnesota, was taking all the classes for that and then started volunteering in the emergency department and really seeing kind of what the life would be like as a medical professional. And then through that realized that I was really more interested in figuring out like how the body and brain worked. I was really less interested in like the actual medical practice of all of that. And so by deciding, that I want to pursue more research goals as opposed to medicine, I'm saying no to going the route of a medical doctor, but it's really allowing me to embrace kind of the ultimate career trajectory I ended up on.
Lima, we weren't able to hear you before. Love for you to also respond.
Yeah, can we hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, let's do this quickly before it goes. I don't know what's going on today. I think my biggest no was saying no to a PhD the first time. So I came from a master's program before this, and I thought I wanted to be a PhD or thought I wanted to continue, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And everybody was like, well, you're really good at this. You should go, you should do it. And the most powerful thing somebody told me was, if you don't want it right now, you don't have to do it. School's not going anywhere. And that gave me the space to like go do other things that I think have better informed me as a professor and an so just the research that I do, I think is much stronger because I said no.
You
Yeah, that's it.
all, sorry. I want to uplift some of the things that you have shared, and the common thread is that and this is not what this session is focused on, but there's a lot of power and good advisors and good mentors and people helping you navigate different aspects of your journey. Ifeoma, you stressed on like clarity, like knowing what you want, and Luke, you were talking about perhaps exploring some experiences that provide you that clarity, right? So that you can get closer to your yes by weeding out some of those no's. And Shalima, you talked about timing, right? So clarity, timing, and what are experiences that bring us closer to that? We had a lot of students talk about, how do I know that right time? And Shalima, you touched on this already, like, is it a PhD that I need to be pursuing? Is it a research associate position? Should I be taking a gap year? How do you know when you're ready, whether that's logistics, finances, academically? So my question is, how do you know if you're ready for graduate school? And those sort of examples, PhD, master's, how do you decide? So whoever wants to start us off first, how do you know if you're ready?
So that's interesting. I think I've done all three, and I can say why I was ready each time. So after undergrad, I decided, well, someone helped me decide that I wasn't going to go MD or MD PhD. So I knew that I needed to learn a little bit more about what I wanted to do. So I did a research assistant. I worked at Princeton for 1.5 years. I'll call it 2 years. So the first year in. And so I think wasn't excited about working at Princeton, but it confirmed that I liked research. And so research was something that I wanted to do. And a year into that, I had an encounter with that faculty advisor about what makes one ready for doctoral level training. And I was not happy with the comment that was said, but it also made it clear that I was ready for a PhD. And so I literally left lab that day. I took about 1.5 weeks off. I took my GREs, and then I applied to a bunch of grad school and chose a school to do my PhD. So I did my PhD, and again, do you do a postdoc? Do you do more training? Do you work? And at that point, that's when and my PhD was in molecular biophysics, biochemistry, so very different from where I'm at now. And so towards the end of my PhD, I knew that I wanted my work to be more population focused. And so I then lived in Nigeria for 4 years. And I knew then that that was like the best time to do it, because I was thinking about opportunities on how to use my training as a PhD student to provide more access to research in lower middle income countries. So then doing that for about 4 years, I came back to the States right before COVID. COVID happened to everyone. And at that point in time, it became clear that this was the best time to now get my MPH. And so that's why I now went to Hopkins now for my MPH. And during the MPH, you know, will I go into industry? Will I do a postdoc? What will I do then? And I think towards the end of the MPH and doing, you know, the MPH program is designed in a way where you get to get a feel of a lot of things. And it just came back to like research is the thing for me. And so that's when I knew I was ready to do like the postdoc. And it's interesting because each time I knew I was ready to make a transition, you know, it always, an opportunity kind of like presented itself, like, oh, you made the decision, great. Like now you can see that this opportunity is a really good opportunity for you. And I was able to welcome that opportunity with open arms and, you know, just walk right into it. No, not necessarily walk into it, but it didn't seem like such a hard decision. And so I think it's a matter of, you know, I was telling someone earlier, you always have to audit yourself, kind of figure out where you are, what you've learned, and where do you see yourself, and you know, are you ready for that next step to get you closer to where you want to be, and whatever that looks like. It's not going to be exact, but whatever that picture kind of looks like are you ready for that next step, and then you transition over.
Nice. Yeah. I think a lot of very similar things from my end. So like for me, when I was going into my 3rd year at University of Minnesota, because I had come from community college, I could have been graduating that year, and really was faced with this exact thing, right? Of like, do I graduate this year and apply for PhD programs, or do I wait and do an additional year to gain like expertise and all of that? And for me, what really helped me was just talking to different people, like mentors, other PhD students that are in similar positions, and seeing kind of what they recommended, what skills they thought would be important for me to succeed in that role. And yeah, then just like introspection on like, am I ready for that next step yet? Or do I want to go in more prepared than I am now? And ultimately, I decided to wait and do the 4th year. And I'm glad I did, because I got a lot more research experience. I came in better prepared for my PhD. But yeah, really, I would recommend just talking to people that are in the positions that you want to be in and seeing, you know, what are their thoughts. And yeah, don't trust any one person, right? Because one person might be very, very wrong. So talk to as many people as you can and try to see what the consensus is.
Shalima, would love to hear from you as well.
I hope you can.
Sorry, folks, there's some issues that unfortunately are happening with Shalima, but she is here. So
Yeah, I'm can you hear me? Okay. So yeah, I knew that I was ready when I had a strong why to go back. I taught, so in between my master's and getting a PhD, I taught for a little bit at the City University of New York. And that helped me be able to take inventory of what it was I wanted to do long term. It also to new things that I wanted to do that the PhD was going to help me with. And so I think by taking the time away and being able, one, to be in the space, but also to not force myself to do it too soon, that in having that, I was able to do some introspection and realize, you know, I actually do have a reason for going right now at this moment.
and that really ties in well to several questions that we received about as people are navigating a gap year, is there something that they should be thinking about, like a postbac or, coursework or anything else to better set themselves up? Do you all have any recommendations for people that are making those decisions and want to, build their portfolio during that time? What recommendations might you have?
I guess a lot of it depends on, it's hard to say what your next step is, but if you were to imagine like where you would want to be in the next year or two, then, and where you're at now, do you think that where you're at now will get you to where you want to be in the next year or two? And then if not, what's missing, right? And so I can use that at the end of my PhD. I knew that I wanted to kind of like be a basic scientist with like a population focused lens, but I knew everything about myself from like undergrad, research tech, PhD was hard science, right? And so there was no clear transition to why would someone who's interested in like RNA protein interactions and the chromosomes and the epigenome, why would they all of a sudden want to do cancer epi, right? And how does cancer epi as an epidemiologist, how does that connect to anything that she's done? And like, what's the big question? And so for me, living in Nigeria and thinking about research access and health equity and things like that, that was the transition. That was what I needed to fill in to show that, oh, this person does have a public health lens, right? Like it may not look like the traditional public health scientist, but like she could be a public health scientist if given the opportunity. And so that is like my own personal example. And so if you're looking at yourself now as like someone who is, I don't know, let's say more in the humanities, but you want to transition to basic science, then yeah, like a little bit of basic science coursework, maybe trying to do some research experience or what have you, like that is a good case to show how you've gone from where you are in undergrad using the time that you have in between before you submit for applications to your next step, right? And also thinking about also where you are now and where you want to be. Do you have mentors that can speak to, yes, this person is worth the shot, right? Like I like to think of it like, even if you feel like you're the wild card, like you want to be able to show like why you're such a good wild card, right? And so it's that self audit, right? Like, where am I? Like, what do you think is missing? And talking to people, right? Like learning more about other people's journeys, and thinking about your journey and what could you fit in to get you to the next step. So yeah.
I appreciate that, Ifeoma, because it kind of helps us frame that it's very individual, right? The decisions that you make, you're considering opportunities and sort of personal costs, right? Like, what does that mean depending on the undergrad institution you went to? What does your debt look like? What are your obligations? What are other things in life, right? It's a full picture as a full person. So I'm going to pose another question to Luke along these lines. Like, if people are considering, a gap year or maybe directly going into further graduate education or graduate education, excuse me, does it really make a difference if they are pursuing a master's first or a PhD first? Do they need to do it in, a particular order right after undergrad? I mean, yes, master's first and then PhD, but, how do people make better decisions about what will be valuable for them based on their interests?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think like you were saying, it really depends on the individual's case, right? Like I think oftentimes we view like the traditional or like straight through route, like you get your undergrad, then immediately master's, then immediately PhD as like what you kind of have to do, but that's really not at all the case, right? And the main thing is just having mentors and talking to people to see like what skills do you need to develop, what skills do you want to develop, and how would you go about doing that in order to ultimately achieve your goals.
Shalima, you talk a little bit about your experiences? I'd love to hear from Shalima and others as well. What are some pros and cons? You talked about taking pause of, maybe working for a little while before pursuing a PhD versus like immediately going into a PhD so that you can be done faster.
The PhD, taking a little bit of time is really helpful. One, to get your bearings, especially if you've been in school. For me personally, I was burnt out. I didn't want to be in school anymore, and I think that's a valid enough reason to right now. It also gives you a little bit more time to make an informed choice about where you want to be in the long run. Because it's sort of, especially with PhD programs, a pretty large commitment that you're making for your life. And so it gives you the time to really evaluate that, to not feel rushed in that decision. Cons, there's a little bit of feeling behind maybe that can happen. You never really are, but you can feel like it when you take the time off to do other things. Other things usually help to enrich you as a person. They can make the experience more interesting. They can make you as a candidate who's applying more interesting. The pros. The cons can just be, especially depending on what field you're in also. Sometimes the field's moving fast, or it's not the same as when you took the time off, depending on how much time you took. Worth it, I think, ultimately, to take a step back.
Thanks, Shalima. We lost you a little bit in the middle, but we were able to get your key gems, so we appreciate that. We received a lot of questions that also have to do with folks being interested in multiple things, which I think is lovely because all of you have shared with your bios that you're also interested in multiple things and have had to navigate that. So we received this really great question, like, could our panelists touch a little bit more on how they have navigated that, like, and ultimately found that maybe one thing that was right for them? I don't know if you found one thing. I suspect that you continue to be engaged in multiple things. So, but that's a real thing, like for a lot of people, especially where they are in their academic journey. What if you have strong multiple interests? How do you narrow down a career pathway or an educational pathway? And then how do you find a niche within that? So I'm sure you have some gems for us here as you are navigating this still, because again, I can tell from your bios that you're interested and engaged in a lot of different things. So Luke, perhaps if you could get us started.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I would say that I still don't think I found my niche and probably never will. Like, I expect I'll be studying something slightly different 10, 15 years from now. But the main thing that's kind of helped me in navigating this is, one, if there's something I'm interested in and it's like a really strong interest, is just to pursue that for a bit and then see, what do I like about this? What don't I like? It's like when I switched from pre-med into more like planning for industry, I did an engineering internship. I got involved in research, doing deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease, and then looked at that and was like, what components of this do I really like? And what I loved was kind of discovering new things, right? And what I didn't like as much were the practical concerns that come along with designing a product, like the financials and all of that. So then it led me more and more into research. And then within research, like, yeah, if there's something that's interesting, I would just pursue it for a while. And if there's multiple things that are interesting, like, look for some sort of common thread, right? Or is there some research avenue I can take that does combine these? Because oftentimes the most dynamic and interesting research and career paths is looking at those intersections of different trajectories that we would normally think of as being completely separate. But there is probably some common route you could take that would include both of them.
Ifeoma, would you like to take us your response?
Yeah. So I think that I'm always a believer that I don't think people have interests for no reason. I think it's about being sensitive to like what are the underlying themes in your interests and how do they connect to the big picture of how you see yourself in the world. And so when I think about that, in my own journey, I really like hard science. I love DNA, RNA protein interactions. But I also really like people. I like people, I like helping, I like advocacy work, I like thinking about my work in a way that allows voices that are not heard to be heard. And also thinking about my work as a way to provide an opportunity for those who think they're unable to do the type of work that I do to see that they can. And so those are a lot of different interests, right? Because in one space, some people are like, oh, you should definitely go into admin. Or in another space, it should be, oh, you should go into just basic science advocacy. And another interest should be like, oh, you can just like go into industry, like, and then they see all these other different things. And so I've always kind of just focused on the different bits of pieces so that you get to a point where you kind of carve out an intersection for yourself. And so even now when I think about like what I'm doing now as a postdoc, it's not because I was some guru spatial statistician, no, right? I took the course while I was doing an MPH. I did the MPH basic epi courses and things like that. And then I also have like science, like strong science background, and then just the idea of PhD or research, it just makes you observant to think and ask questions, right? So you're able to think and ask questions, and you're like, how do you get the answer to the question, right? Like that's the goal of the PhD. Is you're just a really good problem solver and critical thinker. And so I essentially just use that and combine all those interests together. And I'm like, yes, this is kind of what I want to do my postdoc research on. Not because anything else I've done up to that point actually makes sense or you would not take from what I did as a PhD to say, this is where it should be as a postdoc. You would not take from what I did. I mean, maybe from my MPH a little bit because you're kind of like gearing your way there. But even then, you would not take from what I did as an MPH to say like, this is what she's doing as a postdoc. But if you look at like the sum total of my life up until now, it would be like, yeah, that makes sense for her. Even now, like a friend just sent me a message that popped up on a notification, like, are you sure you're not going into industry? And I'm like, no, I'm not going into industry. I really like the academic life. Like it fits my personality. Like I have autonomy in what I want to do. I get to give back in a way that's very authentic to myself, and I get to do really cool research, and that's me. I've tried to deny it for years, and then I always find my way back, right? Like each little break was always like, I'm not doing this. This is not me. And then, 2 months later, I'm in something academic, and then people are like, why are you still here? I'm like, I don't know. I remember finishing my PhD and telling the diversity representative at Yale, and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely not doing academic. I'm over it. I can't do it. And she was just like, I would just wait, come back and check with me in a year. And I came back and checked with her in a year. She's like, so how's it going for you? I was like, okay, you're right. Okay. So but then so yeah, so you hold on to all the different pieces of yourself. And the goal is to try and get the training and the skill sets that allow you to live your most authentic life. And if your most authentic life is embracing all those little interests, and you're really serious about wanting to do that, you will. For my postdoc, we have like people who come in once a week during the academic year to talk about their trajectories. And there's a woman now who has a law degree. She has a PhD. She like the kind of work that she does is just all over the place, right? But it all fits to all the different things that she's interested in. It took her decades to get her law degree, if memory serves me correct from her story, but like it worked for her, right? And so there's no one right way, especially where we're at now in society. Like what academia looks like for each one of us on this panel now is so different than what it looked like for our mentors like 20, 30 years ago, right? It was like undergrad, PhD, postdoc, tenure track. Like tenure track is oversaturated, right? So you have to like flex it a little bit and figure out where to go. And so that's where you get to explore yourself and, you know, carve it the way how you want it to be. So yeah.
Ifeoma and I are at the same institution at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and she reaffirmed what all of our incoming graduate students and current students say, which is, I'm interested in all these other wonderful things and that are intersecting, but also wildly different. So low-key pitch for public health. If you have multiple interests, explore public health. So we have a few questions, and both of you touched on this a little bit, right? Like actually holding space and time for exploring different experiences and then seeing if authentically it makes sense for you and what you want to do. How have you navigated making a decision of, yes, you do need a PhD in order to be able to do? I love Emily's question in chat in our Q&A box that says, could you be essentially doing what you wanted to do and have a career without having your PhD? Because, you know, we've received some questions about, like, can I just do a master's and do the research that I want to do or do the things that I want to be able to do? So how do you discern at this stage where they might be in their undergraduate careers that a PhD will actually be useful for what they want to do professionally?
Yeah, it's so obviously I needed a PhD to be a postdoc and needed to, like, eventually I want to be a tenure track faculty position, and it's kind of a requirement. So for me, because when I was doing research during undergrad and realized that I really liked the kind of like academic flavor of research and wanted to do research, you know, in a university and teach as well, it was a very clear choice because it is a requirement, right? But if you're more open to, you know, doing research in other routes or don't even know if you want to do research, that becomes a little bit more difficult. In which case, I would say, you know, get involved in more research experiences and figure out where you see yourself and what kind of environment you want to be in. And then that will help you decide, do you need a PhD or do you not? And then also, depending on what kind of techniques or research you want to be doing, there might be specific skills that you need. And sometimes those can only, or the easiest way to get those is through a PhD. But a lot of it is, yeah, just thinking about like, what kind of environment do I want to be in? What kind of work do I want to be doing? And is a PhD the best way to get that or not?
Yeah, and I would agree with all of that. I think the other piece too is do you want to have ownership of your research? And so if you know that you want to lead your research, ask the question to your research. You need the PhD. I mean, there are other doctoral programs, so I shouldn't say that you can't do it with other types of doctoral programs. I mean, but you need a doctoral program of some sort, right? To be able to get to a point where you are able to really take ownership of your research, if that's what you want to do. And so I think that that's the allure, I guess, of the academic life. Sometimes people can see that really clearly in the academic setting. For those, my friends that have gone into industry and do other things, sometimes for them, like just having the PhD just helped them climb the ladder. That was just it. So I mean, there doesn't mean that you can't do it without a PhD. You can. I think people just understand that, you know, with it comes a certain set of skill sets. And so the real question is, like, do you want those skill sets? And if you don't want those skill sets and you don't see yourself utilizing those skill sets, then I wouldn't do it. It's a big investment, not just financially, but personally. And I think the other panelists mentioned, like, you know, when the opportunity first came, she said no, and then she came back to do it. So there's always time too. So I think it's, where are you at now? Where do you see yourself long term? But like the next leap there, like if that next leap requires a PhD, then go for the PhD. But if you feel like that next leap doesn't require their PhD, then yeah, get a master's. You never know, like you can do the master's and be totally fine. And you may do the master's and get to a point where you're like, all right, I need a PhD, and you go back and do the PhD. I'm just all for like, wherever, I joke sometimes with folks, I'm like, I just go where the wind blows. And so, if the wind blows me to an MPH, I just went and did an MPH. And if it happened to blow me to go do something else, then yeah, that's what I'm just gonna do too. I've Mahnoor will know this because I tell people this all the time, and they think I'm saying it that one time to be funny about it, but it's a very like, I really do encourage people, just do what you think feels right to get you to like if I were to take a jump, like what do I need to get to that jump? Everything else is going to work itself out. Like I just need to worry about to get from like point A to point B. What is happening about B? I am not thinking about that right now. I'm just thinking about like A to B. And then I'll figure out if I need to go to C or D or anything else after that. So yeah.
Thank you both. And it's also great to hear like some overlapping advice and also some different unique things about your experiences. And I want to acknowledge that for our participants that might be from a first generation background or don't have a lot of experience to career outcomes, these types of conversations can be really helpful. Just the advice to do, Luke, as you mentioned, informational interviews or, just kind of get more exposure to experiences. Or Ifeoma, what you're saying about point A to point B, it can feel like anxiety overload, right? You're saturated with, this person is making this decision and maybe I'm behind. And Shalima pointed to that too. Like, you're not behind, you're on your own respective journey. But sometimes, when there isn't a significant amount of exposure to career outcomes or role models, it can feel like that. So I appreciate you all sharing your experiences. And I know that it's helpful for the folks that are joining in our audience today as well. And this whole series, I think it's meant to help people just get more information so that they can clarify a little bit about what they want to be doing next. Shalima, we have a couple questions from folks who are trying to figure out if the PhD is the right path for them for two different reasons. So we have a question talking about if I'm not really sure about my test taking skills, but I enjoy research. Is a PhD the right path for me? And then another question that says, if I haven't quite taken the recommended coursework, again, is a PhD the right path for me, or graduate school the right path for me, or how can I remedy that? So again, is the PhD the right path for me if I'm not very strong in taking tests and exams, and if I haven't taken quite the coursework that other people have taken? So hopefully we can have Shalima respond.
Okay, I think I'm back. I think. I think a lot of it will depend on the types of programs you're looking into. A lot of programs aren't test heavy, right? Like they're research heavy. And so the only test that you might have to take is the GRE, and even that's going away little by little now. So I don't think, not being a quote unquote good test taker is like a reason to not get a PhD. And then the second part of that, which was about not having coursework. Yeah. You can always beef that up in the interim, right? We talked a little bit about like what to do as you're preparing to do that. For some places that might actually be a little bit of a problem. And again, this is going to be depending on the program. Some programs cover all the introductory bases. They don't need you to come in having like a very solid grasp of certain ideas or concepts that they're using. And some programs have prereqs. And if they have the prereqs, well, then it doesn't mean like you're doomed. It just means that you might have to take some time, spend some time at a different institution, an institution nearby, and go get those done in advance of applying. But you should never feel like, oh, I haven't done this, therefore the PhD is out of the question, right? It might just take a little time or take a little bit more navigating to get there.
I'm going to ask if our other two panelists, if one of you has anything additional that you would like to add.
I would just build off that and say that, how much tests are actually involved in the program varies quite a bit, but almost everyone I've talked to has had very few exams in their PhD coursework. They tend to be much more like project based and research based. Like I probably had under 10 tests in my entire PhD. So yeah, that would not be something that I would be super concerned about if you like the research and the work, which is the point of the PhD.
And I think to add, I think if you have a really good relationship with your advisor or mentor, one way or the other, something will work itself out. So I did my PhD at Yale, and so their requirement, I mean, they don't do like A through, at least at the time, it wasn't A, B, C, D, E, or F, but it was like you needed to have like a certain number of honors and a certain number of like high passes to like, you needed to basically like stay in status, right? And so there was always a way, right? Like there was always like, if there needed to be something that needed to be like fixed out in the end, there was a way. But I think the key was that you had to have shown a really strong commitment to the work that you're doing. And you also had to show a really strong commitment to really wanting to do well in your coursework. Even if you're not the best test taker, that's true. Some people are just not. And I say this because I'm thinking of someone where things did not work out for someone. But that was actually the student's own doing, right? And it had nothing to do with the school not wanting to keep the student, but the student just really not taking time to engage with the faculty members and just do the bare minimum that they're asking you to do so that you stay. And so then when you're unable to do that, I think that speaks more towards one's commitment to wanting to stay the route for the PhD. I think once you're done with the coursework and you're now solely focusing on your research, once you're solely focusing on your research and writing, that's a different stage, right? But for the basic sciences, it is that year and a half of coursework, right? And your qualifying exams. And so all of it really is like the student's commitment to really want this, and communicating that need or where you need help with the right people so that it works itself out. And so if they've accepted you, they want you there. That's always important for people to know. And you just try to be as transparent as possible. When you're struggling, you make that known. Where you need help, you make that known. If you need to meet with your TA every office hour, you make that known. If you need to email your faculty member because you have a question, you do that, right? Like, because like once you do that, they know that you really want this degree, and then everything else will sort itself out. They're not going to give you like an A, right? For the sake that you showed that you really want this. But I think there's a way to ensure that you get the PhD in the end.
And I want to uplift that asking for help, knowing your resources before you are in a crisis situation is a life skill. So who to ask for help, when to ask for help, are things that we continue to work on well into our professional and adult lives. So thank you for affirming that. You brought us right into our next question. So one of our panelists in our one of our participants sent in an advanced question that I think is wonderful for us to kind of explore. Throughout your journey, have you ever experienced a period where you really felt stuck and were just unsure how to navigate, and how did you navigate that? Perhaps we can start with Shalima.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I think for me, the biggest time that I felt this, probably academically, was starting the dissertation, because it's a big choice, like deciding what to do, deciding what to take on, not feeling equipped enough to handle that was difficult, is difficult. I'm still kind of at the beginning of it. We're just getting out of it. What I found is helpful to me, and this can go a little bit to what Ifeoma said just now about having a good relationship with your advisors and mentors. Talking to people, right? Whenever you feel stuck about anything, helps to clarify often the thing that you were stuck about. And so for me, it meant going to people who knew my interests, who understood the way that I talked and thought, having conversations with them about what I liked and didn't like. And then that helped me put language to some of the things that I was thinking, some of the things that I wanted to do and pursue. And that was really useful. And then at other times with professional issues, I think every time I've graduated, I've never known what I wanted to do with that. And the best thing you can do is to say yes to the thing in front of you, all right? Which has come up a lot of times, but whatever's in front of you, do that, right? Like, don't wait for the perfect thing to come along, just do the next thing. And eventually what happens is, at the very least, that tells you, okay, this is either a yes or a no for me. And then you can keep going or put it down and then do the next thing after that. So for sure, talking to people and then doing whatever's next.
We'll popcorn it, whoever wants to answer next.
Yeah, so whenever I'm feeling stuck, I think just talking to people honestly is important. And sometimes also trying to figure out like how to get out of whatever that feeling is. Sometimes that's also a sign of just you need to take care of yourself and take a break. I found more often than not, if I'm in a position where I'm not feeling motivated or things just feel really hard, it's more often that I need to take a break. Like I actually need to just unplug, not do anything, and rest. And then do that and then come back to it. And then all of a sudden, that's fine. Now, of course, time is not always on our side to do that. And so when time is not on your side to say, I'm taking a break, you have to talk with folks who can help you get to where you need to go to like quickly so that you can get that done and then take the break and then go back 100%. And so that has been, even with my advisor now, if we're talking about writing stuff, there's a section of a paper we're trying to write, and I can speak the words out with her beautifully. She's like, but you just said it, just write it. I'm like, I don't know, Cole, like I'm really trying to put the words together and I'm just trying to figure all these things out. And then she's just like, maybe you should just take a break. And I'm like, really? No, I'm gonna do it. She's like, I think you just need to take like a break. It's like, but I can really do it. She's like, you should just take a break. And then I'll take a day or two to myself. And I'm like, oh yeah, I really just needed to take a break. So yeah, so talking to people helps you get there faster. But also like sometimes you just need to say, I'm not feeling well today and I'm going to sleep or do something fun or just not be stimulated by work so that you can start with a clear mind.
Yeah, I think especially like the time at least that I felt the most stuck was like mid PhD, because I don't know, like undergrad is kind of like a series of sprints almost, and then you have breaks and then another sprint, whereas a PhD is like a marathon. And if you don't pace yourself, you will get burned out and be exhausted and be like, I don't even like any of this work. Why am I here? And oftentimes that is because you're not resting enough and you're going too hard and you need to like slow down a little bit, rest a little bit and come back to it. And then it will be more exciting again and you'll feel less stuck. So yeah, reaffirming the idea of like making sure to take care of yourself and rest and pace yourself in all of this.
The next question I wanted to pose actually for you, Luke. It's one of my favorite questions that we've gotten today. When did Luke Rosedahl realize he no longer wanted to pursue pre-med?
Yeah, I think when I realized that I did not want to be pre-med is my first year at University of Minnesota when I was doing some of the pre-med classes, but then also volunteering in the emergency department and was helping out with like collecting blood pressure and stuff for like their long-term research studies. And then at the time I wanted to be either a cardiac surgeon or a brain surgeon. So I was shadowing a cardiac surgeon and seeing like, what were their life like? What are the hours like? What kind of stuff are they doing? And through that process, I realized that I was really interested more in the research side of things than I was like cardiac surgery itself. And also realized that like abnormal sleep schedules, so like staying up all night and then 2 days later staying up all day, that oftentimes goes along with especially like residencies in the medical profession is just not for me. Like if I don't sleep consistently, I can't sleep and it really hurts my quality of life. So like looking at myself and being like, I will not thrive in this environment. And so, yeah, I guess the two things were realizing that the lifestyle was not for me, and then realizing that I was more interested in the research questions. And at the time, I didn't know that an MD, PhD was an option. If I had, I might have gone that route, but I'm really happy where I ended up. So.
This is why these sessions matter. And we do have a session about more information about how to apply to PhD programs that's coming up on Monday for folks that are joining us today. I know that we've received a lot of very specific questions related to PhDs and MD PhDs, so please be on the lookout for those sessions. We have another question in our Q&A submitted by Emily about, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name. How did you choose what subject and area you wanted to do for your PhD? And this is for all three of you. And then we also had another question that talked about how were you able to specialize in multiple things if that is indeed what you did? So how were you able to choose your subject area? And have you been able to combine multiple interests? So Luke, can we ask you to start us off? Oh, go ahead. I figured we'd go the other way.
Yeah, so going into my PhD, I didn't really know what I wanted to study. So I was coming from engineering, and I knew that I liked kind of the computational approach to neuroscience, but I had no idea where that would bring me. So when I was looking at PhD programs, I was really looking for programs that kind of did computational models of the brain, and read a bunch of different people's papers and tried to find papers that really resonated with me. So my PhD advisor, Greg, I read some of his papers and just loved his approach towards modeling neural circuits. And so at the time, I wasn't particularly interested in category learning or visual learning, but I loved the approach and the questions I felt like I could answer with that. And so then I chose to do that and then just kind of continue to follow it from there.
So to follow on that, I think it really depends on the program you're applying to. So I applied to Yale's PhD, and I went to Yale for my PhD. And I applied based on what I looked like right now, or at that time was now, as a PhD candidate. Because Yale's program and most of the other BBS programs that I applied to, what was really important was getting into a track within the BBS program, right? So like once you're in the track of the BBS program, so my PhD is molecular biophysics and biochemistry, but my research was in the epigenome and epigenetics, right? So, by transcript, by everything I did undergrad, I am pure biophysics, biochemistry, and that's all the places I applied to for my PhD. Because I think for the PhD, anyone who's reading your application, they know that your interests will change. Like the idea is that, can you commit to the journey of the PhD? right? Like not if you know what your big research program is going to be. It's just, can you commit to the 5 to 6 or sometimes 7 years needed to get the PhD? And do you have an idea of what you want to do with the PhD? And they also know not everyone's going to be a 10-year track professor, right? A lot of people go into consulting, a lot of people go into industry. They know those things. But the question is, have you really thought about what you want to do? So for that reason, it's really like where you're at now, especially if you're a program, the programs that you're looking at are more like a track of a bigger program, then you do that. Not all programs have that flexibility. And so at that point in time, you want to think about what type of research you would want to do that could help you get to what could be your possible next step after the PhD, right? Like also knowing that a lot of times, again, what you're doing with your PhD is not going to be your life's work as an academic or as a researcher or in consulting or industry, right? Like the PhD is just for you to learn how to critically think and problem solve with a set of tools. That's it. And so at that point, you then have to think about what you have, who you would like to work with, and so forth. Some programs are really clear about that. Other programs don't like that because you may say that I want to work with Luke. And everyone at that institution knows that Luke is now going on job talks and maybe leaving, right, to take some big 10-year track position at Harvard. Okay. And so for that reason, if your application says that I really want to work with Luke and they know that Luke is going to Harvard, you shoot yourself in the foot, right? And so the real goal is to show that you want to do the PhD. This is what I have. This is what I can offer. And, then you go from there.
I would love to hear from you as well, as you are a PhD student currently.
Yeah, so in terms of picking a subject, I simply did the thing that was most interesting to me and had always been, right? So I'd always had an interest in African American literature, and that's what I started out with. And then I started to realize I also like Caribbean literature. And so this is where the question about multiple interests came in, because I was like, well, now I have to pick. And that was terrifying to me until I realized that the best way to go through that was to just find places where your interests touch. All right. So instead of deciding I'm going to do African American or I'm going to do Caribbean lit, I'm now working on Afro-Caribbean immigrant literature. Right. So that technically qualifies as all of the things, right? People who are, by virtue of living in the United States, African American or Black Americans, but also have a Caribbean background, right? So I get to do all of the things that I love without having to eliminate anything that I really, really enjoyed. And most of that was just me trying to find a way to have it all a little bit, trying to see a way to just follow what I enjoy, because it's very hard to get through the PhD program if you don't like the thing that you're doing, right? If you're just picking a niche to pick the niche, to say like, okay, well, this thing is popular, or this is what's going on the job market or whatever, like, sure, that's helpful and those are things to consider, but it also makes it a lot more difficult if it's not something you're truly interested in to really finish and feel like a whole person at the end of it.
Wow, Shalima, that's some wisdom drop. Feel like a whole person. But I think it's really important to, again, affirm that sometimes as you were thinking about graduate school or processes, whether it's a job that you're applying for in your gap year or navigating what might be farther down in your graduate journey, so much of it is tied to your professional identity and can sometimes feel like your whole identity. And what our panelists have done so beautifully today is kind of talk about all the other things, your interests, your mental health, your ability to advocate for yourself, to follow your interests, and that if you don't do things in a particular order, it will still be fine. You will still be fine. And part of the journey is learning as you go along. So I want to thank our panelists one more time for giving of their time and their expertise. We are right at time, but before we close it out, I have one final question for our panelists. As we say that your professional identity should not be your whole identity, I would love to hear from our panelists about what is something that they are doing for themselves that will bring them joy this week. Hopefully you don't have to think too much about it, but would love to leave our audience with that. So what is something that you are doing for yourself that is going to bring you joy this week or this weekend?
Yeah, for me, I'm going to go hiking up in New Hampshire. I love being out in nature. It's relaxing, helps me kind of unstress, I guess, or unwind after thinking about things. And it's also a good chance to do pondering research type stuff. So I'm hiking in New Hampshire.
I have actually a very full social calendar this week, which I love for me. But so a couple dinners with some people that I really enjoy spending time with. And then the most fun thing is that I'm in Baltimore and the Kennedy Center in DC is putting on a stage adaptation of The Kite Runner. And so I'm going to go see that on Friday. I'm very, very excited about that.
So I think for me, it's just spending time with the kid. So I have a 5-year-old and we're officially on summer break. And so I'm looking forward to not split scheduling summer activities while doing other work, which is going to be my life for the next several weeks till school starts, and we say thank you to the teachers. So I'm looking forward to a very slowed down weekend.
Wonderful. I love that for all of you. So a reminder for folks that are joining us today, make sure that you are also taking pieces from what our panelists have said about personal life and finding time to replenish your cup and re-energize. Another reminder, again, that the VPD Professional Development Series continues, and tune in on Monday. More information is available in your Google Classrooms about the next upcoming session and sessions. So we hope that you'll join us on Monday. Thank you once more to everyone that was also supporting us behind the scenes with tech and also emotional and moral support. To all our participants, we're going to close out and we hope to see you next time. Thank you all. Take care.